Try this, see if it works. Okay, so welcome to 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. I'm so excited. So tonight, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk through the binders or the printouts that we have, so you can kind of see what we're doing for that. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about Bible study and how we do Bible study, how different people do that differently. I'm going to give you guys a chance to kind of share how you study and what you do. We are going to talk through the cheat sheet that's in your binders or in your printouts as well. And then we are going to take some time and I'm going to introduce 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. So giving this first part, this context and perspective that we have at the beginning of our cheat sheet. We'll talk through that. And then if we have time, we'll read through 1st Thessalonians at least together. So that's a whole lot, so we'll see how this goes. So, okay, so first things first, here are the binders, or printouts. So this is our cover page for 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. If you need copies, you need a binder, see Rebecca, right? See Rebecca. So.
And we decided we're not going to charge at this point.
Okay.
Because these are recycled binders.
Yes, thank you, Courtney.
We just had a room of paper, so.
Okay.
Unless we have a whole bunch more people, we got to buy binders. We don't need your
okay.
System.
Perfect. So those on the video, if you didn't hear, all the supplies or materials are free, so that's good. Okay, so first thing that you will have in here is that you want to look at is your study schedule. Okay, so this is going to be the dates that we're meeting. You'll notice that we are meeting the 1st and 3rd Wednesday of every month. The only time that will change is in May at the very end. May has 5 Wednesdays, and so we're actually going to go ahead and meet on that 5th Wednesday to finish out the study on the 8th, or the 8th time together. It'll actually be chapter 3 of 2nd Thessalonians. So that's how this will work out. So it's going to be one chapter every 2 weeks. So you'll have 2 weeks to kind of do your own personal study at home. We'll come together and we'll teach on that. So tonight's the intro night, so you didn't have to prepare for anything. You didn't have to do anything, just to show your lovely faces here. And then on the second half of that page, Cassie created a little checklist for you if you want that to kind of follow along with our inductive method. Again, not everybody has to do that method, but we're going to talk through that. For people who are new, that's always been kind of the goal of Reflections, is one, to study the Word together, but to also give us tools on how to study the Word. And for some people, to convince them that they can, that this is for all of us. We don't have to be super smart, scholarly people. We don't have to, well, we learned last semester we're all theologians, but we're all called to study God's Word. Thank you, Gideon. I appreciated that sermon. But we're all called to study God's Word. There are different ways to do that. There are right ways, and there are not as right ways to do that. And so we also, part of our goal is to give tools on how to do that. So we'll talk through that a little bit tonight too. So any questions on the schedule or the checklist? Nope. Okay. The other printout that you should have then is your double-spaced copy of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. They just bleed from one into the other, so should be for easy use. So we do the double-spaced copy, so that way you have plenty of space to write on. So what I tend to do is I will do my annotating on one side. Well, this is my extra. I also use notebook paper, but then we keep this side blank to write any of your notes based on what you're doing on this page. So we can help you if you're left-handed and you want a left-handed version. We can show you how to flip that so it works for left-handeds.
We have a few.
And we do have a few ready. Okay. So these are basically your materials. Okay. The last thing in your materials that you have, or if you print off, is the inductive study cheat sheet. Okay. We've used this method. We've altered it over the years, but we've used it, gosh, 6 years or more now. It's been a long time that we've been doing this. So we've altered it a little bit. We've kind of shaped it as we've learned and as we've grown and how we're studying the Word. So I am quickly going to walk through this just so you can kind of see. This is a method. I'll just speak for myself. This is the method that I use mostly. I don't do all the steps, and I don't do all the steps all the time. So you can kind of, that's one of the reasons I actually really like the inductive method, is because you can expand it and make it more complicated if you have the time or the desire to do so, or you can simplify it and pare it back based on what you have going on in life and what you're capable of and your time constraints. So, okay. Any questions so far on this? Okay. So, inductive method. So the first thing we begin when you're doing the inductive method is we're going to pray, which we did do that when we started. That should be the first thing you do, is pray before you study, and pray in the middle of your study, pray at the end of your study. Do the best you can to pray your way through that. I do that a lot when it's something I don't understand, and I'm like, those short, quick prayers of, I don't understand, I need your help. So that should be kind of saturating our study and time in the Word. The first thing we do, once you've chosen the book that you're going to do, you want to look at the context, the perspective about this. This gives us a really good framework for which you're going to use to approach the text and what we're reading. So the first questions you're going to ask are, who wrote it? When was it written? To whom was it written? You want to look at the culture, the setting, what's going on in that area specifically, or maybe even around the world at that time. How does it fit into the main story of the Bible? We've talked about this before, that the Bible the story of the Bible can be told in 4 words. Give them to me.
Creation, rebellion,
Mm-hmm.
redemption,
And consummation. Yeah. So those are our 4: creation, fall, rebellion, redemption, and consummation. So the whole storyline of the Bible fits into that. So whatever book you're studying, so if I'm in Genesis, and I'm in Genesis chapter 2, where does that fall? Creation. But if I'm in Genesis chapter 4, where am I? Yeah, that happens fast. So creation part is very small in kind of what we call the meta narrative. So, right. So you want to look and see what you're studying, how it falls in all of that. Then you're going to also ask the question, what style was it written? And the last one was, why was it written? All of these are going to give us a really good, like I said, a framework for what we're studying. Okay, next thing you're going to do after we've looked at the perspective, now is going to be your actual study process. The first thing we do is we're going to observe the text. So the question we're asking here is, what does it say? Okay? The first step of observation is to read it. And then read it again. And it wouldn't hurt to read it again. That's just letting you kind of soak in that and really see what it's saying. After your first or second reading, you can begin your annotations, asking questions of the text. I'm not going to go through these real specific. I can, if somebody wants more specific, we can have other conversations. So that's when you start annotating, using a dictionary to help you look up words maybe you don't understand. I'll admit I look up words that I'm really pretty sure I understand, but if it's a keyword, I'll still look it up and get definitions that can be really helpful in drawing different things out. You're going to look for transition words, lists, contrasts, and comparisons. You get a lot of those, especially in the Gospels, commands in Scripture. After you kind of have done all of that and you kind of got a good feel for that, then another step that you can take is outlining. I'm a terrible outliner. Terrible. So I don't outline. I'll bullet point. Cassie can testify. I'm not real good at outlining. But if you're really good at outlining, that's a good tool to use. Make sure it's just, again, to make sure you're understanding the points and all the subpoints. That's that idea, okay? Then you can look for other themes if that's something that you kind of have worked on and learned how to do, looking for the themes and see what all of that is in the text. So all of this is work to help us understand what is it actually saying. And you'll be surprised how many times maybe it's something you've heard before, passages here and there that are familiar to you, but maybe not the whole context of that. So you're going to go into it thinking that you know what it's saying, and then after spending some time here, maybe even just realize, that didn't say quite what I thought that it said, or it said more than what we thought. That's usually what you find out. So after you've kind of gotten a good feel for what it says, then you're going to look at interpretation. This question we're asking is, what does it mean? So now we want to find out, what does it actually mean? What did I not ask? What does it mean to me? I didn't ask that. What does it say to me? This type of interpretation, what we're looking for is to actually look at, what does the author mean to say? What is the point that the author is trying to get at? So here's where we're going to use cross-references. We're going to allow the Bible to interpret itself and to help us understand itself. After we've kind of done that, the next step then is paraphrasing, where you're basically just writing. You've looked at all the cross-references, you've read it over and over again, and now you're going to try to put it all in your own words and kind of paraphrase and see, this is what I think it's saying. This is what I think the author is saying. We're obviously going to be looking at Paul's letters. This is what I think Paul is trying to say, okay? And then it's only after that step, after you have done kind of this work in the text on your own, then you're welcome to, there's not a commentary police, so I can't make you, but this is a good time to, then if you want to look at different commentaries and kind of see what they have to say, see if they support what you think it said. And I'll be the first to say, there have been times I thought it said something that it didn't say. And when I got to commentaries or got challenged on it, I realized, oh, I missed it on that one. So, but it was a beautiful opportunity to grow. So don't stress out on your paraphrasing. Don't be too afraid to kind of process and put out there. Nobody has to read your paraphrase. You don't have to tell anybody this step of it, but it is a really good practice to get to that, okay? So then the last thing we're going to ask is, again, not what does it say to me, or how does it make me feel? We're going to ask, how should it change me? What should my response be? How should I respond in light of what I'm reading? Okay, first question you should ask is, okay, what does it say about God? Because every passage of the Bible is going to tell us something that is true about God. We've talked before, the point of the Bible is to reveal who God is. So that's our first question. What does it say about God? Then you can ask, what does it say about me in light of what is true about God? Okay, and then the last one, what should my response be? Should I be repentant? Should I be thankful? Should I be encouraged? Those types of things. That's where we finally kind of get to find our place in it. So, okay. All right, so that's really quick, our kind of inductive study cheat sheet that we have and how we kind of walk through that study. And what Cassie gave you was a really good, we used to kind of specifically put out the days. We had Monday was to read and observe, and Tuesday was the day that we would kind of annotate and begin to ask questions, and Wednesday was looking up definitions. Thursday was cross-references. Thursday was always a big day. We did that. Thursday's the day we would look at cross-references, and then Friday would be our paraphrase day. So if you find that that works for you to do something like that, great. We're working a little bit slower this semester since it's only one chapter every 2 weeks. So it doesn't have to fit in as tightly as we used to when we had like a chapter a week and we had to get it through. Hello, Genesis. It took us forever. Okay, but that's, if you need someone to come alongside and kind of help you, maybe get in a plan or answer some of the questions or figure out how to do this, feel free to ask Cassie. Just Cassie. Kidding. I'll answer questions. We would love to help you. We would love to help you kind of figure that out. I do want to take a couple minutes, though, and ask, does anybody here have something that they do different than this, or something that they add to this, or a way that they maybe have altered this, or anything that works for them? We only do this not because it's mandatory, but because it's a really good kind of starting point for people. But then it's totally okay that you start with this and then you kind of do your own and do what works for you. So I just wanted to give you guys an opportunity. Does anybody have anything they like to share that they kind of do as they study?
The cross references. I always found them really helpful, but really overwhelming to try to knock out in one day because there's usually so many.
Yeah.
So I usually will spend like the first day or two like reading through it and annotating it and reading it in different versions, and then the next 2 or 3 or 4 days of the week is all cross references and study Bible notes and things like that. So.
Yeah, that's good. Anybody else have something that works for them? I know some people do kind of a more precept study where they're really looking at all the words and they've got the symbols and the colors and things like that. So that's another pretty in-depth way to study. For cross-references, I don't always do them if I don't do all of them anymore. Depends on what we're doing. I also don't, if it's in the same book, a lot of times those will be the last ones I look up. I'm usually more interested. If I've got to pare it down, that's how I choose. Oh, it's in Corinthians and we're studying Corinthians. I'll go look at all the others that aren't Corinthians just to get a little more across the Bible comparison. So that's one way that I help pare them down because they can get overwhelming. So, okay. You don't have to do that. All right. So anyway, part of what we're going to do as we're studying this semester, you will have your chapter that you'll go home and study that. When we come back here together, each time that we meet, we're going to have a little bit of discussion time. Cassie and I are going to provide discussion questions to have at the table. We may, depending on how many's here, we may break up into groups or do group discussion, however that just kind of works. But have some time, discussion questions about what you have studied. And then we'll do some teaching time, not always maybe about the whole chapter, maybe sections in the chapter. The epistles are usually pretty packed full, so it's hard to sometimes get a whole thing in there. But so that's generally what these will look like. We'll come together, have discussion time together, and then we'll end our time usually doing some sort of teaching through what you've studied. And then once we're done, then when you leave, then you'll start the next chapter, and we'll just kind of start that rhythm over again. Okay. Anybody have any questions on that? How that works? Hey, good. Okay. All right. So that's our schedule, the inductive study. We've gone through the materials. I'm going to look at the time. Oh, we're doing really good. Okay, so we are going to go ahead, and I'm just going to introduce 1 Thessalonians and 2 Thessalonians. Sound good to you guys? We will jump right in. Oh, I wanted this out with these questions. Okay, so we're going to look at the context. We're going to answer some of these perspective questions tonight together, okay? So the first question asks, who wrote it? Paul. Paul wrote it. It's easy, okay? He wrote it around AD 50, 51. It is very likely one of his earliest letters. They actually think Galatians was the first one written to the church in Galatia in AD 48. And so this would be the one written right after that. So AD 50, 51. And he was likely in Corinth as he wrote this. Okay. Acts 17, which I am going to read that tonight. It's fun now to go through the letters of Paul, now having the year that we spent in Acts, because just so much of it points back to that and gives us the foundation for that. So I'm going to read quickly. Acts chapter 17 will give us the foundation for where we are. Now, when they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. And Paul went in, as was his custom, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that it was necessary for the Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead, and saying, "This Jesus, whom I proclaim to you, is the Christ." And some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a great many of the devout Greeks, and not a few of the leading women. But the Jews were jealous, and taking some wicked men of the rabble, they formed a mob, set the city in an uproar, and attacked the house of Jason, seeking to bring them out to the crowd. And when they could not find them, they dragged Jason and some of the brothers before the city authorities, shouting, "These men who have turned the world upside down have come here also, and Jason has received them. And they're all acting against the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, Jesus." And the people and the city authorities were disturbed. And when they heard these things, when they had taken money as security from Jason and the rest, they let them go. The brothers immediately sent Paul and Silas away by night to Berea. And when they arrived, they went into the Jewish synagogue. Now these Jews were more noble than those in Thessalonica. They received the word with all eagerness, examining the scriptures daily to see if these things were so. Many of them therefore believed, with not a few Greek women of high standing as well as men. But when the Jews from Thessalonica learned that the word of God was proclaimed by Paul at Berea also, they came there too, agitating and stirring up the crowds. Then the brothers immediately sent Paul off on his way to the sea, but Silas and Timothy remained there. Those who conducted Paul brought him as far as Athens, and after receiving a command for Silas and Timothy to come to him as soon as possible, they departed. Do you guys remember that studying when we did Acts? And it was, remember they walked, it was like 100 miles. They walked 100 miles just to bully Paul. That's crazy to me. Really angry. It takes a lot of anger and energy to walk that far. I don't know if I'd go 5 miles. So, okay, so that is the frame, or that's the beginning of how this little church started. Paul was only there probably, there's a little bit of debate, but it was probably around 2 months. He wasn't there very long before he was chased out of town. And he did stick with kind of his usual game plan, like we saw in Acts. He would go into a town. The first thing he would do is he would go into the synagogues and try to preach to the Jews. And usually he was faced with opposition. So then he would leave the synagogue and then he would begin preaching to the Gentiles. So that's what happened here. It says that he went into the synagogue 3 times to proclaim that Jesus was the Messiah. And then they didn't like that. It's kind of crazy. So one of the things I did find interesting as a reminder when I was going through Acts, if you remember right before chapter 17, when they go to Thessalonica, Paul sees in a vision a man asking them to come to Macedonia. Thessalonica is the capital of Macedonia. So if we remember that, Paul wanted to go, I don't remember where he wanted to go somewhere else. And then he got this vision asking him to go to Macedonia. So then he does that. He goes to Macedonia. They first go to Philippi, so that's where they go first, and then into Thessalonica. So the Thessalonica would have been about 100,000 people there, so it was pretty big for the area, pretty metropolitan for its time. It had a lot of, obviously, Greeks there, so high population of those that had polytheistic beliefs. And then it wasn't a small number of Jews. It had to have been enough that they had a synagogue there. So, but obviously then you're monotheistic Jews. So in this one town, you've got these 2 pretty predominant religious beliefs happening. Okay. Let's see. It is interesting too, and kind of sets up, I think, the rest of, or kind of a good theme in Paul's letter. Now remember, they got Paul to leave, and so Paul wasn't there, but they drag out Jason, and just because he was giving them housing. just because he was, hospitable to them. They brought him before authorities and charged him with sedition. Now, sedition is going against the king. So he was charged with basically trying to get other people to just kind of declare their allegiance for another king, which is interesting. In some ways, it's not untrue. Because we'll see in the rest of Thessalonians, if you look at it in that kind of through that filter, there's so much that Paul is saying to the people. This is how to live in light of King Jesus who is coming. So waiting for the coronation of King Jesus, this is how we're supposed to live, knowing that he's coming in light of that. And this is what it is. This is what it means to declare your allegiance to King Jesus. So it wasn't untrue. It just wasn't the same kind of king that they were afraid of. They actually should have been more afraid than they were. And in that time frame, too, we had, if you're a history buff, that's the time of the Pax Romana. Pax means peace. This is the peace of Rome. What that really meant was you will have peace in your life as long as you place your allegiance with Rome. So Rome had to be your God. Rome had to be your king. And we'll see here in Thessalonians, in both of these, that Paul is telling them about a different peace because they're giving their allegiance to a different king. Okay? So Paul is anxious to hear about how this church is doing. He wasn't there very long. Must have been long enough to kind of get a church off the ground. Seems super fast compared to how we know that church plants go these days. But got a church off the ground. He's super anxious to hear how they're doing, but he can't get to them. But this time he's in Corinth. He cannot get to them. So he sends Timothy to go and check things out, see how they're doing. So this letter is actually written in response to the report that Timothy brings back to him. Okay, so that's why it's written. We talked about it's a letter, so that's the style that it is written. Oh, I didn't even talk about where it fits in the story. This is part of the redemption. This is after Christ has come, and this is what does it look like to live as redeemed people. And we're at this point, and us now, still awaiting the consummation of all those things. Okay. Some of the things we're going to see, I did some of my work reading through, I have this commentary from John Stott, and he gives some really good, just kind of ways to look at it and some themes and ways that he breaks it up, which I found super interesting. So I'm going to share those with us tonight. I think they're just helpful to kind of have in your brain as you're going through and reading, and just kind of giving us an idea of what we're looking at. So in 1 Thessalonians, there, according to, this is all John Stott, okay, not me. According to Mr. Stott, or should we call him John? Do we know him well enough to call him John? So, too many Johns. There are two ways. The first way is you can break 1 Thessalonians up into two parts. The first part is narrative. So 1 Thessalonians 1, chapter 1 through chapter 3, 13. That's the end of 3. It's narrative. So it says looking back at their visit. So they're looking back at the time that the apostles were there. Well, not all the apostles. Paul, and then Timothy and Silas, who is named Silvanus, depending on your translation. Same person. Okay. Then the second half, starting in chapter 4, verse 1 through 5:28. So the other half, or the other part of it, is exhortation. So this would be where Paul is basically addressing the problems that Timothy has brought to them. So that's one way to look at it. Your narrative and exhortation. And that's a great way to look at it if we're just going to look at this as from an academic standpoint. Noah's great, and we do learn from that. I like this other way that he offers. So there's a second way, and this is all about how what 1 Thessalonians tells us about the gospel. Okay, so the first, and this is broken up into 5. So I have A, B, C, D, and E. The first part is looking at how the church spreads the gospel. So this is evangelism. We're going to look at the topic of evangelism. This is chapter 1, verses 1 through 10. How the church spreads the gospel. And B is how pastors serve the gospel and the church. So we're looking at what they're doing. So this is kind of in that context of ministry. And that's chapter 2, 1 through 3:13. And then C is how the church must live according to the gospel. So this is looking at behavior. And that's chapter 4, 1 through 12.
What was that again on C?
C, how the church must live according to the gospel. So we're looking at behavior, how the gospel applies to behavior. And that's chapter 4, 1 through 12. And then D, how the gospel should inspire the church. Hope. The heading of hope. That's chapter 4, 13 through 5, 11. And then the last section he has is how to be a gospel church. It's looking at community. At the end there, we're going to see it's actually, if you like practical things, you're going to like that section. It's a whole lot of little practical list right there. Okay, so that's chapter 5, 12 through 28. How to be a gospel church. Okay, so that's how he broke up 1 Thessalonians. 2 Thessalonians, it's in 2 Thessalonians, we're going to see a little more of his talk about the second coming of Christ. The big fancy word for that is parousia. Not that you need to know this, but it's fun. Right? Yeah. That just means big fancy word for the second coming of Christ. And the reason that this is important is, you'll see it in 1 Thessalonians, but especially 2 Thessalonians. What Paul is writing to them is all in light of this, all in light of Christ's coming. And it's true here, but we have our hope in suffering because Christ is coming back. We need to behave a certain way and order our lives a certain way because Christ is coming. Those are the things that he's saying. So the first part, now we're in 2 Thessalonians, chapter 1, 5 through 10 is looking at why God allows suffering and the hope we have in Jesus. So it's that revelation of Christ. That's what we'll be looking at there. At this time, the Thessalonians are undergoing a lot of pretty severe persecution. So he's going to give them hope, why we need to endure, why we can endure, okay? Then chapter 2, am I going too fast? Okay. Then, did you say yes? Okay, sorry. Why God allows suffering, chapter 1, 5 through 10. Okay. Then chapter 2, 1 through 3, the beginning, first part of 3, is he is going to address some false teaching. We see that a little bit in First Thessalonians, but he's definitely going to address this false teaching. This specifically is going to be in reference to the day of the Lord. What that means, they have people coming in saying that it's already happened. Well, of course, that's going to upset the apple cart because that's not what the apostles have told them. So he's going to look at that and talk a little bit about the Antichrist, again, with this idea, the second coming of Christ. And then the rest of the book is going to be addressing what John Stott calls a disobedient minority. So there are those that are living what Paul calls idle lives. So he's going to talk about, here's the example that we gave you. You need to live in that way. Why do we live in that way? Because we're living in the hope that Christ is going to return. And there is a way for us to live and to operate and to function as we wait. We're not just here, just twiddling our thumbs and waiting. There is a way that God wants us to wait. So, okay. So that's what we're looking at. 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, those will be kind of some of the themes that we're going to see, how it will kind of break down for us. Does anybody have any questions on that?
Could you go
Yes.
back to
Happy to.
C in the first?
C, how the church must live according to the gospel. That's chapter 4, 1 through 12. Behavior is kind of the main idea. The word for that is behavior.
I need A and B.
A and B. Of course you do.
I'm writing.
Somebody should be writing for her. So, okay, A is how the church spreads the gospel. The main word is evangelism. I should just give you the one word.
Yeah.
Chapter 1, 1 through 10. And these, again, are all just how the gospel applies to these. Ready for B? So B is ministry, how pastors serve the gospel and the church. That's chapter 2, verse 1 through 3, chapter 3, verse 13. Got it? Okay. Anybody else? I'm sure we'll go back to this. We'll repeat this as we're going through our study. So I just thought it was really helpful.
What was the one word for D? Oh, hope, wasn't it?
Hope. Yep. How the gospel should inspire the church. Okay. Any questions? Let's kind of, if I say any more, we're going to be jumping right into chapter 1. So we're not there yet. Okay, so let's take some time. If you guys are good with it, I would love to just together out loud read through at least 1 Thessalonians together. I'm going to end the video.